So did you get the assignment you wanted?
No. I really wanted to go to Lakenheath. I wanted to go see the world. But the higher ranking guys, the cross train guys, got their first picks, and I want to say there were only a couple of Lakenheath assignments, but I got a Seymour assignment, which was the last pick.
There's not much to choose from. I mean, you got Seymour Johnson, Mountain Home up in Idaho,
and Alaska,
Boise, and Alaska,
right,
and then Lakenheath. That's it, right?
So there were very limited spots for the overseas assignments, and I was looking to see the world. I was looking to do something more interesting, but I got Seymour. So, I was less than pleased. I mean, obviously, any of them are good. I was happy to go anywhere, but just in the context of, did I get what I want? No, not really. Of course, I was, it turned out fine. I had a great time there, but it wasn't my number one assignment. So I got selected. I guess it picked me that I was going to stay at Seymour. Unbeknownst to me, the two operational units there, the 335th and 336th, have a draft. So every time a new class, B course class gets ready to graduate, the list of people who are going to be assigned there gets sent out to both squadrons. And I don't know the exact methodology that they use to pick, but they pick who's going to go where. And I think, some of that has to do with there are people that know people. They know, that guy's good or that guy's shit. I have no idea where I fell in there because there wasn't anybody in particular in either of the squadrons that I knew. I didn't have any family or professional acquaintances in there. So I would hope, I don't know, maybe anybody that knows, if you saw my name and I had a good or bad, let me know. But I got picked to go to the 336th.
What's the first thing that happens then when you arrive in a new squadron?
Harassment. No.
That's where I was going with the question, because I've visited the Rockets and I visited the Chiefs at Seymour, and I remember seeing in the Chiefs, a board saying FNG1, FNG2, FNG3.
Although they call him Boy over there.
They call them Boy because maybe it was at the Rockets.
Yeah,
I saw that, and
we were FNGs. In fact, we had FNG name tags.
Okay. And the Chiefs, their naming process is a secret. You have to go through it to understand it. But what was the naming process then? This is your tactical call sign.
Yeah.
How does it work, and how did you end up with Hacker?
Well, first of all, I'll say that there was not a harassment process. I've actually distinctly remember being very welcomed into the 336 when I got there. You had I remember going into the DO's office, Al Botin, AB, who again was another one of these guys that I'd read about. Was a Desert Storm vet, and he was in the Smallwood book, and so he was like one of these stalwarts. And he just laid it down from his perspective. What his expectations of a brand new guy in the squadron were. That my number one job was to get in the vault. My number one job was to learn. Number one job was to fly. I distinctly remember him saying, I shouldn't have to push you. I should have to pull you back. The stage was really set in terms of what they expected out of us. Now, naturally, as a new guy, there's going to be, gentle chiding around the squadron about this or that, and your errors are going to be a little bit more amplified than probably other people who are established names and all that kind of stuff. But no, I really felt very welcomed. The group of people that were there were terrific. Again, you're in your first fighter squadron. It has sort of a fraternity atmosphere to it. It has a huge amount of brotherhood and fellowship. Even as a new guy, you're welcomed in immediately. You're no longer just some, shit pants out there. You're a rocket. Welcome to the squadron. And I'm sure it's the same in every squadron you're in, but, you develop a tremendous amount of sort of pride in your unit very early on, and that, manifests itself in a lot of high spirits. Naming. So, names are only given of pilots who are mission qualified. So there is a mission qualification training process that takes place. It's another training course. Again, it sort of has a very similar footprint to what the B course has. It's the same, because you are basically certifying to your squadron commander that you can appropriately fly the mission sets that your squadron performs. And at the time, at least, different squadrons had slightly different mission sets, but in general they were the same. So basically, mission qualification training at Lakenheath would probably be basically the same as mission qualification training at Seymour, but I don't know that. So there was a BFM component, and there was a high aspect BFM component, and surface attack and things like that. So, I remember it being maybe somewhere on the order of like 10 flights. It took a month or two. It wasn't too complicated.
How many hours have you got then in the jet?
69.
Good number.
Yeah, 69 is always the right answer. It was less than 100 when I graduated the B course. It probably was really 69. So not, all things considered, pretty inexperienced. I certainly was not comfortable in the airplane when I got there. I wasn't comfortable tactically employing the airplane. I wasn't comfortable going to the tanker and getting gas. There was still so much to know about flying the airplane well. Same kind of story with the T-38. You can put somebody in it and they can kind of, haphazardly make their way through and safely fly the airplane, but there's a big leap between that and being able to do it with some level of actual proficiency. And the learning curve is steep, especially when you're adding, new components, new bits of tactics. The training wheels have come off, and unlike the limited scenarios that you're exposed to when you're in a B course, the scenarios that you get out in an operational unit, they're trying to prepare you to go against the, the flanker with chucks and ducks. So scenarios are more complicated in mission qual. They're less complicated than you would see on just a vanilla training mission with qualified people. But so anyway, after MQT, that's when you're sort of eligible to be named. The process as somebody who is being named, you don't get involved, obviously, in seeing how the name is chosen for you. Once you are a named member, then you're authorized now to participate in the naming process. So behind the scenes, all the named people gather together, and over the course of your limited time with the squadron as a namee, the people you've been flying with have been picking up the squadron doofer book. We haven't really talked about that, but that's kind of a sort of blank notebook that sits in the bar that only named member of the squadrons are authorized to read and write in. And there's a little section in there, numbers of potential names for a particular person. And so when an instructor flew with me, that I'm sure I did some boneheaded kind of thing, and afterwards they said, oh geez, this guy, let's call him Pantalonius de Caca or whatever. And so there'll be sort of a pre-programmed set of names that you've earned over the course of your time with the squadron. So now fast forward to in the squadron briefing room, all the named members are in there, and the doors are locked, and the beer is flowing, and they'll individually go in and consider the names that have been put into the doofer book, and then with the wisdom that comes out of the fluid of knowledge, new call signs are dreamt up, and eventually they'll vote on whichever one is the appropriate one. We could go through the vast etymology of how call signs come up.
Give us some examples, and you have to tell us why yours is yours.
I have to?
Yeah. Well,
Can I leave nothing to the imagination?
We said we would do an ask me anything. We've done an ask me anything,
but it's not answer me anything. It's ask me anything.
So let's start then with some others. Let's see if we can get you warmed up.
Okay, so the easiest call sign is the natural. And the natural is if you have a name that resembles something else, a pop culture star, movie star, famous Air Force person, like, if your last name's Arnold, well, a natural might be Hap Arnold, right? Or, if you're Davies, it might be Steve Davies. Steve Davies, right? Or if it's I'll mention a name that's not somebody that I flew with, but I think is a funny call sign. There was someone whose last name was Harder, and his call sign was Poker. right? So these are, they form a phrase, a humorous turn of words. That's a natural. Then you have your acronym call signs. There's some famous ones that people would know. There was the guy who I actually met, who was an F-16 pilot, whose call sign was rotor, and it meant ran off the overrun.
Spin.
Yeah. I mean, there was a Strike Eagle guy who attempted to be named Stuffer, and it meant stop talking, you fucking retard. I mean, there's all kinds, and you can tell that they're very flattering names, right? I mean, it's just like being Iceman or Maverick. It's a very strong, glorious call sign. It's always meant to show how awesome you are, or alternately, it's really meant to be something sort of humiliating. It's meant to be. Anyway, that's not. That's the acronyms usually are commentary on something that you have done less than proficiently or humorously. And then there's just the named call signs that, I don't know, you accidentally jettisoned the canopy when you shouldn't have in flight, and now your call sign's ragtop. Whatever. I mean, there's endless possibilities with that. And again, it's all based on things that you've done wrong.
So, Hacker, your call sign. How'd you get it? Where'd it come from?
It's a funny name, isn't it? Lots of people think that it means that I'm a bad golfer. I don't golf, but apparently that's if you
hack at the ball.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
I get lots of people be like, "Oh, is it about golf?" Lots of people think it's like, "Oh, are you like a smoker? Do you cough a lot or something like that?" And no. Okay, so the quick and dirty of it is, at the time that I was going through the B course, sort of late 90s, 98, 99. I was a techno geek, and I had my own website, totally different topic that we can talk about, but I had a journal that I kept, an online journal that I kept while I was going through the training process. But I had the technical skill to host a web domain and build a website and all that kind of stuff, which was a pretty savvy skill at the time. And so when my B course class got all of our academic information and our test gouge and stuff like that, I volunteered to basically host that test information. And so people that were outside, that were not students, that were looking at that, had a different perception of kind of what that information was. And so the joke was that, or I guess the accusation, the not terribly true accusation, was that I had hacked into the McDonnell Douglas web servers and stolen the tests and stolen the test information. And so that story happened while I was in the B course, and then that made its way across the street over to the operational squadron.
So we're going to do a special podcast on your combat experience. You're going to come back, and we'll do that another time. And I know that in the next sort of hour or so of us talking, you'll reference your combat time. But when you have a call sign and you fly in combat with it, does that then mean it's fixed? It can't be changed?
That's the custom. Yeah, okay. That's the custom. If you've flown in combat with a call sign, that's your call sign, regardless if you do something stupid from there on.
So that works both ways then. So you could have a call sign you actually kind of like, and you get to keep it, or you could have one that you don't like. Okay.
Yeah, and I know of people who had call signs that they didn't like, and then they spent the rest of their career trying to undo that call sign. God, there was a guy that I flew Eagles with who had a particularly non-flattering call sign, but he was a good guy. And, when we went different ways, several years later, I heard them mentioning this guy, and, oh, yeah, he was a Strike Eagle guy. You'd know him. And I was like, I don't know anybody that goes by that name. And then they'd be like, oh, hey, I talked to him, and he knows who you are, and how come you don't know him? And come to find out that it was a guy who had again, non-flattering call sign, that when he moved, he saw it as an opportunity to, start anew, and convinced a new group of people that he had a different name. And I took a little bit of pleasure in saying, no, that's not his name. This is his real name. Take this back to your unit, and next time you're in the bar, introduce that.
And you're no longer friends now.
I guess. Yeah, we don't. He's blocked me on Facebook, which is, the official yardstick of whether you're friends with somebody.
So picking up on the chronology of your career, you've not arrived at Seymour because you were already there, but you've arrived now at the rockets. You've had this, sort of great introduction from your squadron commander. He set the set the bar. You know what you've got to do. You become mission qualified. What does the rest of the tour look like?
Well, as I said earlier, my first year was just full of all kinds of really great experiences. I got to go to Red Flag for the first time, and we could fill an entire podcast about that.
Just fill 10 minutes on that, then, if you can. I mean,
okay, sure. So that for me took place, I don't know, maybe 6 months after I'd arrived. So I was still very new, and certainly that is an exercise that I have known about for quite a long time. There was an old Aviation Week video on Red Flag from like 1984 or 1985 that I had on a VHS cassette that I had worn out watching the video of F-5s and all that kind of stuff, doing battle with Phantoms and the old ACMI, the really stupid looking Atari digital ACMI replays and stuff, and I loved it. So I had it in my mind that it was this great thing that I was going to go do. So it was very exciting, especially given for those people that don't know, the genesis of Red Flag was a guy named Moody Suter who looked at the Red Baron reports, which were the essentially the combat effectiveness reports from Vietnam War for the Air War, which the study essentially said that if you could get a pilot to pass his or survive his first 10 combat missions, that his chances of surviving the rest of the, 90 if you're a 100 mission guy, went up exponentially. So his idea was, let's set up an exercise that has the intensity level of actual combat operations so we can pre-expose a fighter pilot to those first 10 combat missions. So, in my mind, having never participated in that, it builds it up to this 12-foot tall kind of threat. So I was really excited to go. Certainly when I got there, there was so much to learn about a new place to fly. I'd never flown at Nellis before. Operations in and out of the range, flying with a ACMI, a data link pod that was data linking my information back to a large mission replay system that was, tracking and could display the progress of an entire air war. Just lots of new things. And the part that really sticks out with me as I look back is on my first mission that I was flying, which was a day mission. It was a interdiction mission, so I was dropping bombs on something. I don't know what it was. And I was a 2-ship formation in a much larger strike package. I don't remember how many were in there, but it may have been like a sort of a 20-ish aircraft strike package. So it was substantial. And there were another squadron. The Chiefs were actually there at the same time, and they were our offensive counter-air support. It was something like a 50 aircraft, friendly mission. And you start out with this daily mass briefing, in like this 300 or 400 person Red Flag briefing room where they talk about what's going to happen. And then you break down, and then there's the strike mission commander briefs all the strike aircraft, and then you further break it down, and you finally get down to your 2-ship. And the guy that was my flight lead was a guy named Flash Fitzsimmons. And I assumed that we were going to sit down and have like a full, all 4 of us were going to get in a briefing room. We're going to have our normal element briefing and all that kind of stuff. And all he said was don't lose sight. And that was it. And we grabbed our shit and we started walking out to the airplanes. And I thought, what the fuck? I mean, like that's what you're going to brief me? Don't lose sight? Like, this is my, primary responsibility as a wingman. I know not to fucking lose sight. And, little did I know that was pretty sage advice that, once things are getting really harried out there and there's airplanes everywhere and there's all kinds of stuff going on that, if I can just focus on the one task of not losing sight, hang on while things are going crazy and there's SAMs and bandits and all kinds of shit happening on the, radios and in life and all that, that turned out to be a much tougher task than I actually expected it to be. Not on that flight, but on a subsequent flight, I actually did lose my flight lead on the way out, leaving the target area. Similar type of scenario as what I just mentioned. This was, I don't know, probably 3rd or 4th, Red Flag mission. And it was a low altitude ingress to the target and then a low altitude egress as well. I was on the way into the target area, and I got jumped, or I guess I sort of almost ran into a aggressor. It was an F-16 that I merged with down low, and he kind of came out of nowhere. I was flying down low, just totally padlocked on not hitting the rocks, and there's my flight lead. I'm not hitting the rocks, and there's my flight lead. And for whatever reason, this guy just kind of popped out of nowhere over a ridgeline. Down low, you're not able to actually do a full, BFM engagement. You're limited to, I think it's 180 degrees a turn. Anyway, we did that turn and terminated the engagement. By that time, me and my flight lead are stripped. I really don't know where he is. So I tell him on the radio, hey, I'm blind. And he tells me a direction to go, or, he's proceed directly to the initial point, or, go hit the target or whatever, because we were separate. And he's like, I'll be waiting for you when you come off target. So I, make my way in and we execute our attack on the target, come back off target. And what I expected, I don't know, it seems kind of stupid to me right now, but I guess I expected, it would be like being on the range at home, where my flight lead would just be sort of out there orbiting at an obvious spot, and I would see him and rejoin on him, and we'd, skip home. But that was fairly unrealistic. So what really happened was I came off target, my radar's out there, and I don't see anybody. So I tell him on the radio, hey, I don't know where you are. And he tells me his bullseye position. So I've got some sort of awareness as to where he is, but regardless, I point my nose toward our egress point, and I just, put it up into afterburner and haul ass. And as I'm, talking to my flight lead, we're kind of getting updates on position. I'm still staying quiet on the radio because there's a lot of shit going on out there, and you don't want to just be the guy who's jabbering on the radio, as we'll see when it's time to review, some actual combat footage. I wasn't that guy, but somebody else was that guy. You're kind of trying to remain radio silent and afford us to rejoin together. And this is pre-data link days. So it turns out I snag a radar lock on a Strike Eagle, and I interrogate his system, and I can tell it's an E model. So I go, hey, I see, I got you in sight. He's like, all right, you're cleared to rejoin. So, and he's quite a few miles away. So, just plug it into burner and join up on this guy. And it's not the right guy. And the only way that I know this was a few seconds after I joined up, I see the flight lead, or, I guess the pilot, he looks over and he sees me, and he does a big double take. And then the Wizzo does the same thing, and obviously they're like, and I thought, well, that's really strange. That's not the react. Are you surprised? I just told you that I had you in sight, and you told me to rejoin. So you're surprised by that? And shortly after that, my little bingo bug goes off because I've spent a whole bunch of time in afterburner trying to catch up to him. So I go, 2's bingo, 1, and he hasn't said anything on the radio. But right about that time, the airplane that I'm formed up on pokes his nose up. Like we were in the low altitude environment, right? And he just starts climbing away. So I thought, all right, that's not really all that, strange once I've called bingo for us to climb up and pull it back. But no, his burners are lit as we're climbing up. So I'm like, you ass. Like you're not a very good flight lead that I've just called bingo, and now you're climbing up in blower, and now you're going to make me get it. Okay, whatever. I'll be I'm a new wingman. All right, I'll stay in position. So, I stroke up the burner and I go up with him. And I don't know, we're passing through about 10 or 12,000 feet. And I hear on the radio, hey, 2, where are you? And I'm like, I'm off your left wing. He goes, no, you're not. And so it's about this point that my backseater and I both realize, oh. And the backseater that I was with, he says, I could have looked down at my lineup card and seen that that's not the same tail number as the airplane that we took off with. And I'm like, yeah, I could have done that too. Fuck. Now what? Now I've never joined up with the wrong guy before. What do I do now? So, my flight lead over the radio goes, I just stick with who you got, go back home. So, we get out to the point called Texas Lake, which is where everybody kind of gets to. You've probably seen that before, where you get together and go back down the Sally corridor to go back to Nellis, and at that point he starts giving me visual signals to get us all on the same frequency, and I check in with him, and it's Moto Nimai. It's my my weapons officer. So now I'm even more humiliated. Fuck! Now that I've lost my flight lead, and the guy that I've joined up in is the weapons officer. So he's gonna have something to say about my awesome performance. Anyway, so we went back home, and the debrief was a little awkward. I had 2 debriefs to go to. Anyway, that's just kind of one of those things where it's a lesson that you don't necessarily get. Just sort of stateside training, or just large force exercise training. I'd never been in a scenario where there were so many aircraft that we could get separated, and I could randomly. There was another Strike Eagle that, for whatever reason, was alone and had the right color painted up on the tail. So and I would say that there was probably quite a few lessons like that this laboratory allowed me to experience. And I kind of get the whole idea of being exposed to that sort of high intense environment. It toughens you up. It certainly increases your chances of success later on.
That's the obvious question, isn't it? So you went, and again, we'll do a dedicated podcast on it, so don't feel like you have to go into too much detail. But you went to Iraq in March 2003. You were part of the fighting, or the shooting war, as it was, euphemistically called. Did you sort of at that time reflect on your red flag experience and think
red flag was harder than real combat? I can say that unequivocally. Right. I mean, outside of the threat of actually being shot down, and those moments of terror that you get when you realize that your life is actually in danger. Outside of that, in terms of the chaos and the fog of war and the all of the things that are happening at the same time, I distinctly remember thinking, red flag was harder than this. And on the flip side of that, especially as, again, I went to red flag as a new guy. There were a lot of things that happened there that also made me a lot more confident. I mean, on one hand, getting separated from my flight lead, it seems like a minor kind of stupid thing, but it really reminded me that the whole fog of war concept, I mean, it's really chaos, even when you have these very intricately planned missions, and you have specific places to be at specific times, at specific altitudes, and you have all these tactics and things that, even based in all of that, the whole idea about you plan with a micrometer and you execute with a chainsaw, it really sort of reinforced that. But on the same way, you get to go, you get to fly against simulators of SAMs, very, very highly fidelity simulators of SAMs, and it validates these tactics that you read about. I mean, when you're in training, they say, okay, you move the jet this way, do a glib 2, do a level S, and there's never any real world feedback. And I guess I was kind of ambivalent about it, but at Red Flag, they have a camera that's mounted to the SAM site, and there's you in the camera, and they show this in front of the entire Red Flag debriefing room, for a couple hundred people, and it shows the radar lock or whatever, and it shows your maneuvering, and you can see yourself executing these tactics, and you can see how those tactics actually work against a great SAM operator in a very high fidelity simulator. So that, to me, produced a very high level of confidence that, I know it seems stupid, but that the people that wrote the tactics know what they're talking about. And so again, fast forwarding to getting in real combat, it set kind of in my mind that the path to success was to do what I was trained to do. And again, sounds stupid, but there's for me, especially at the very beginning, being in real combat and seeing AAA and SAMs go off and things like that, it's terrifying. It really sort of puts you off balance. I've had moments where I was like quite literally paralyzed by fear, and then the way out of that is, okay, do what you're trained to do. Fall back on that training. And that's quite closely interlinked to seeing in real world practice that those tactics do actually work.
How many hours or how much time had you spent with the rockets then when you deployed? I mean,
I think I had about 700 hours, which it's not really a lot of time.
But that's 700 hours total time, right? You're not talking about 700 hours in the Strike Eagle.
I think it was about 700 hours of Strike Eagle time.
So were you comfortable at that point? A couple of times in the conversation earlier, you talked about, you could fly a T-38 or you could fly a Strike Eagle, but you weren't comfortable doing it. You didn't really know what you were doing.
That's still the case today.
Still. But people talk about HOTAS in the same way, and that's maybe part of that conversation.
It is.
Someone said to me, even for something like the Eagle, which is not as complex as maybe the Viper, it's 300 hours or so to really get comfortable.
That's fairly accurate. And I, by my recollection, I think that was sort of a typical annual flying amount was about 300 hours.
So a year or so of flying the aeroplane, and you should be starting to feel comfortable.
I think that's true. And again, the numbers are kind of failing me right now, but I think it was 300 hours that was required for you to upgrade to flight lead, and that roughly translated up to about a year's experience in the squadron. And so when I, basically as a 700-hour pilot, when I went to Iraq, I was a very different pilot, than I was when I first showed up. Qualification-wise, I was a 4-ship flight lead. I had done a couple of rides of instructor upgrade, although I hadn't completed it at the time that I went off. So, I was much more comfortable both in the airplane and obviously being a tactical leader of other airplanes at the time. I had no experience being shot at that point, which strangely enough is a interesting experience of its own. But I was certainly as comfortable in the airplane as I have ever been in the airplane. And I would argue even at that point that I was probably more comfortable in the airplane then than I ever was at any other point in my career, even after I went back to the Strike Eagle the second time.
So that's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. And again, from my general aviation experience, I remember instructors saying to me that for civilian flying, there's a point at about the 300, 400 hour mark where you become complacent. You're
most dangerous.
You're quite likely to have an accident. And for military pilots, they said to me, because my CFI when I learned to fly helicopters was an ex-Royal Navy test pilot. He said it's 1,000 hours for military pilots. That's typically.
I think that's probably true.
So is that a reflection of that? The fact that you felt most comfortable then at any point before or after? Does that sort of?
Well, there's certainly a component of, I think, my self-awareness as an aviator on my second tour. I knew what I didn't know, and I would even say that today. I will jokingly tell people that I know less today than I ever have at any point in my aviation career. And that's not a quantity or experience argument. That is, I know more is out there that I don't know, right? So the quantity of unknowns is larger than it was in the past. So, and obviously, aviators are always learning. Yeah, I think that's a fairly accurate assessment. It was a question of combination of, I guess, proficiency at that point. I'd done a lot of flying. The hourly requirements for annual training were still relatively high. The budgets had a lot of flying in them, and it was the first time I had learned these things. So these were fresh lessons to me. Again, certainly I hadn't done any combat deployments before that time, so I didn't have the kind of cocksureness that the combat veterans had. One of the things, just very quickly, on a very early combat mission, it wasn't the very first night that I flew, but it was maybe my second or third flight in. I was in a 4-ship formation. I was the number 3 of the 4-ship, leaving the tanker in northern Saudi Arabia and heading north toward Baghdad. And since it had just started to get dark, and It used to be that the E model required some filters to be placed in the cockpit so that you could be on NVGs. So it took, sort of 5 or 10 minutes to kind of open up this kit, and while the airplane's on autopilot or the backseater's flying or whatever, you're, setting up the cockpit. And then once it's all set, then you put the goggles on and you click them down. And when I clicked them down, way off in the distance, I could see, sort of the Baghdad area, and it looked like a fucking maelstrom, man. Like there was just like everything was black except this one area where there was just fire and iron everywhere. And that was one of those, frozen with fear moments. Like I was, holy shit. And right in the middle of that, my flight lead, who had been he was an 05 at the time, and he had been a veteran of, Baltic War, kind of, Yugoslavia, Serbia. Yep. He got on the radio, and his comment was, "Here they come, boys." And it was like, I know it sounds stupid, and it was kind of, just an offhand comment, but he was so calm and so cool that I was like, all right, if he's that cool, I can be that cool too. I mean, if he's that confident that, tighten your seatbelt down, man, it's about to get good, that gave me a lot of confidence too. So I didn't have quite the same, I guess aptitude or whatever of guys that had been there before. Maybe my apprehension level, made me pay attention a little bit more, because certainly, as we can talk about later, but my later on, weeks later, I was very desensitized to these startling things where, I would see surface-to-air missile launches and just sort of casually talk about it. And I would know in the first 5 seconds whether it was coming my way, and if it wasn't coming my way, fuck it, I don't need to pay attention to it. Where early on, I'm watching everything like a hawk and making sure that it's not coming at me, because it feels like all of them are coming at you. And that's what these guys who were already combat vets, they'd already sort of learned those lessons, and I'm guessing at least externally they gave the appearance of being desensitized to that.
I think it was Robin Olds, wasn't it, who said that fear is a natural thing. There's nothing to be ashamed in.
Right.
That the real skill is taking that and turning it into an action,
for sure,
into some kind of positive energy. Do you then? I know that you shouldn't compare wars, but in Southeast Asia, those guys were having people shot down all the time. The numbers were just ridiculous, and to do 100 missions was extraordinary.
Right.
Not quite the same Southwest Asia, not quite the same in Iraq, but you did lose people. There was one Strike Eagle shot down. I think Salty Watkins and Das Boot.
Right. And may have been shot down, may have been, so that's undetermined, but it very well could have been a shoot down.
Yeah.
Didn't rule that out.
Okay. But do you get, does that breed complacency? Well, and it's the same with 1991. The simulations said we're going to lose a bunch of people on the first night, and then it didn't happen. Were you going into that thinking we're going to lose 30%, and at the end of week 4 you hadn't, so now you're a bit cocky about it?
Perhaps. I will tell you from a personal perspective, I tried to block all that out. I definitely had the it's not going to happen to me, kind of thought. Like if you sit around and dwell on, I might get shot down, you're going to be unable to function. So I just didn't think about it. As stupid as that sounds, I didn't think about it. And it's not until certain things happen that sort of snap you back to reality. I was on the ground when Boot and Salty went down, and so that's one of those moments that, wow, shit, now I'm really starting to think about my own mortality and things like that. I had a near shoot down with a Roland that, caused me a lot of self-reflection about that kind of stuff. But outside of those individual moments, you're still thinking it can't happen to me, and that's what allows you, I think, to continue functioning. And as you say, the more time that goes on with all of this chaos happening around you, that nothing happens, the more confident you get. And again, it's to the point where, there were SAM launches and AAA and things that were going off later on in second, third, fourth week of the active kind of air war that by the end I wasn't even paying attention to them. That, had it been the first night, it would have been a totally different reaction. You can't sustain that same level of adrenaline day after day after day after day after day. At some point, you just have to, this is when people sort of, it may be hyperbolic, but that, you hear, ground troops who are in these intense combat situations say, "Oh, I just accepted that I was already dead. And once I did that, then I calmed down," or whatever. Eventually you just get to a point where you can't sustain this sort of level of, natural kind of incapacitating fear, and you just got to press past it. So I didn't have any particular situation. I don't know that I recognized that changed, but it did. It was incremental.